that never happened. Last time we had a huge fire, it was in 1871. And that 1.2 million hectares is 400 times higher than the 10-year average on the forest fires in Quebec.
Welcome to Canusa Street, a podcast at the intersection of the issues and policies between Canada and the United States. Here are your hosts, Scotty Greenwood and Chris Sands.
Welcome back to Canusa Street, everybody, or should I say bonjour tout le monde. We have a very special episode coming up. I'm Scotty Greenwood with the Canadian American Business Council, and I'm joined with the fabulous, wonderful co-conspirator, Chris Sands of the Wilson Center. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Hi, Scotty. I'm doing great with that wonderful introduction. I'm walking on air.
Walking on air. Well, you're walking on smoky air in Washington, D.C. this week, and that's part of our topic today. I'm excited for our conversation. We're joined with a distinguished Quebecer who knows a little something about the Canada-U.S. relationship, about the forest industry, about the recent fires we had. And we want to hear about that, that are pretty impactful, actually. And so anyway, we're going to have a really good discussion today, Chris. And with that, let me ask you to introduce our very special guest.
I am delighted to be able to introduce to our listeners Jean François Samray, who has served as president and CEO of the Quebec Forest Industry Council since 2020. He previously served as the president and CEO of Quebec's Renewable Energy Production Association, known by its acronym AQPER. I don't know if you pronounce that, AQPER, but he had that job for 10 years. Mr. Samray earned his bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Sherbrooke in Quebec and pursued graduate studies in political science at the University of Montreal. He also received specialized training in community environmental law at the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium and a master's in business administration from the Norwegian Business School. A man of action and reflection. I love that. I'm going to use that myself. Maybe more reflection than action in my case. He has been invited to participate in the work of numerous working groups and strategic committees formed by various Quebec and Canadian government departments and ministries. Since 2015, he's also been a representative of the energy sector at the table of partners of the Société du Plan Nord, the North Plan that Quebec has had for now quite a while, which he serves as vice president, as well as being a leadership mentor for graduate students of the Norwegian Business School. And I particularly salute you for taking the time for the next generation. Mr. Samray, welcome to the podcast.
Well, my great pleasure being with you today.
We're so happy to have you. And, you know, Chris, I think you be reflection, I'll be action. That's kind of how it goes anyway.
Yeah.
And Jean François, our guest, is both, which is amazing. And Plan Nord, by the way, is really about the Arctic, isn't it? I think that's...
Yeah, it is part of the development, social, economical, and environmental development of northern part of Quebec. So lots of forests, lots of wildlife, lots of First Nation and Quebecers there, and so lots of possibility also in the mining. Critical minerals are there, and so yeah, it's a huge part of Quebec, and it's really a laboratory of a new way of doing long-term sustainable development.
That's so interesting. Well, but you were one of the impetuses to have you on Canusa Street is you were just in Washington, and we were hoping to have you in studio, and I think our schedules didn't align. But you were in Washington, I think, for some softwood lumber talks. And for our listeners, softwood lumber is a trade dispute that dates back forever, and we've done several Canusa Street episodes on just that trade dispute alone, including having Ambassador Raymond Chrétien. So go back to our listeners and catch up on softwood lumber. But before you do that, we're going to have a wonderful conversation here with Jean François. So what is the state of Canada-U.S. trade in lumber, and how was your trip to Washington last week? Let's start there.
Well, the state of the discussion regarding softwood lumber is that, United States and Canada, so the North America isn't self-sufficient in wood anymore. So the demand due to household crisis, the demand is bigger than what we can supply. So there's a big discussion based on the fact that some wood producers in the U.S. are saying, well, we've been treated, and they're pretending that they're being treated unfairly, that Canada is supporting its market. And so this is in front of international panels, Canada-U.S. Panels, in order to, well, see first if that's true, and second to see, well, what's the impact. But one thing for sure is that for the time being, North America is importing some wood from Europe, and is now up to 8% of the market, which is something that is way above the de minimis level, meaning that Europe could come up without any duties on that wood. So it's part of the discussion. And but by doing so, one thing for sure is that the American consumer isn't getting softwood cheaper, and is paying that extra tax that is put it on wood, and the price of U.S. wood is going up due to that tariff that is imposed on Canadian wood. So who's benefiting from it? One thing for sure is the American sawmills are receiving more than they should from the market due to the tax, but definitely the American way of living, the American dream of owning its own house, is kind of jeopardized due to the fact that consumers are paying their wood at a much higher price than they should.
Mr. Samray, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. It was one of our early episodes. We talked to Trent Lott, the former Senate Majority Leader, about softwood, and one of the things he pointed to was that at a certain point these disputes are solved politically. You have to get some politicians together and they do a deal more than they are really resolved legally. That you had to have some give and take, and that required politics more than sort of a tribunal or dispute resolution process. Now, of course, he's a politician, so of course his view is politicians are central. But do you agree with that perspective? Do you think this is one of those disputes we're going to have to put some political talent, some political capital into in order to resolve softwood lumber, or is there a rule of law process that might do it given the treaties that we have?
Well, I think both answers are correct, and both will happen, because now we're having the first panels that are having their hearings, and their decision is final. So therefore, if the panels come to a point that, well, Department of Commerce did some wrong calculation, they can send them back, and which is what we think that will probably happen on the anti-dumping first round. But then they'll come up with another decision, and then they'll come up kind of saying either Canadian paid too much and Treasury must return that money to the Canadian sawmills, or they'll say that, well, they paid a proper amount, or and then the Treasury will take the money, and then the petitioner will get nothing. So at some point, the coalition asked to their members to sign petition, and in order to get some cash at the end of the story. But there won't be any money going to American sawmills unless there's a political decision, unless there's a compromise that is made. So one day or the other, they'll have to take some negotiating will need to take place in order to get a deal. But so far, Canada has always been able to prove that its wood haven't been subsidized. So it is kind of both. If it goes on the technical road, well, then coalition will get nothing. And then at some point they'll be bored, or they'll get some pressure, and they'll come up to the table. But so far it seems that they're benefiting by the fact that the price of wood is higher that it should be on the U.S. market. So no matter which road the final solution is coming, for the time being, they're making more money.
I have to say, I know how fluently bilingual you are, because it's really hard to joke in another language, and you just said the softwood people would be bored. Perfect.
Just one final point. The thing is that this entire dispute at a moment where North America isn't self-sufficient anymore is kind of a special discussion Based on the fact that Canadian and U.S. wood industry, when it gets to equipment, when it gets to machinery, when it gets to engineering, when it gets to workers, when it gets to firefighting, when it gets by supporting, usually it was Quebec that was supporting the American firefighting. Now it's the U.S. that is there. It's all integrated and it's all part of one big happy family. But then when it gets to softwood, then the Europe is coming on a free ride. No taxes, no nothing. And I don't think that there's a lot of equipment that is sold from the US company to Europe. So every board feed that is coming from Europe is not supporting the industrial capacity and the industrial family of North America. So at some point, it will have to be in the discussion politically.
We're going to take a little break here, but when we come back, we're going to transition from talking about trade and the commercial aspects of this industry to something that has hit a lot of us really hard in the last few days, and that's the smoke from these forest fires burning in Quebec. Back in just a moment.
Are you red, white, and blue, or just red and white? Beaver or bald eagle? Ryan Reynolds or J-Lo? Canusa Street, a masterclass in cross-border relations. This is where Canada and the United States intersect on the policies and issues of our two great nations. But you know that already. That's why you're here. The question is, if you want more of this bilateral bonanza delivered directly to your inbox, and you know you do, how about signing up for Scotty Greenwood's weekly email updates on Canada-US relations? Head to cabc.co to sign up today. And now back to Canusa Street.
Welcome back to Canusa Street, everyone. I'm Chris Sands, and I'm here with the great Scotty Greenwood, and we're talking with Jean François Samray, who is the head of the Quebec Forest Industry Association. Scotty, over to you.
Well, so thanks, Chris. I mean, we were talking about the lumber industry and how much sense does it make in this time of inflation with shortages and prices and all of that for the U.S. and Canada to be misaligned on something as fundamental to the construction industry and housing as softwood lumber. So there's a trade dispute about that. And we talked a little bit about that. But Jean François Samray, I want to ask you about how it's going with the fires in Quebec and Nova Scotia. You know, I feel like sadly we're used to fires from the West. You know, every year there are big fires blazing in the Pacific Northwest, and that's something we've become accustomed to. But this year, in the last couple of weeks, if you lived in New York City or you lived in Washington, D.C. or places around, all of a sudden the air was unhealthy to breathe. And schools were canceled, outdoor activities were canceled. You know, it was very difficult. And the only thing Americans knew about it was there were fires coming from Quebec. So how's it going? First of all, are the fires under control? Is everybody safe? And then secondly, let's just talk about fire management and your views on that.
Yeah, well, on a Canadian perspective, we're already at 5.1 million hectares that are burning, and an hectare is a square of 100 meter by 100 meter. So,
and they're still burning as we talk right now? They're still on fire?
A lot of it are still burning, and numbers are going. For example, in Quebec, we've crossed the 1.2 million hectares burned, and this is something that never happened. Last time we had a huge fire, it was in 1871. Not so sure that they were able to measure it, but now we have satellites, we can track it, and that 1.2 million hectares is 400 times higher than the 10-year average on the forest fires in Quebec. So, it is definitely something, and now all the industry was working hard, supporting the firefighters. Equipments were reoriented into supporting making some roads for for the firefighters, making sure that we were cutting fuel for the fires. So industry was there because they lived there, and it's their own community. So they were fighting for their brothers, sisters, neighbors, and everybody was there. It was hard, but it was something really that everyone's proud of. But now it comes just like in any now where it's kind of a war against fire. Now that we're kind of in some sort of getting traction and getting on the offensive in order to control these fires, it is time to start thinking how we're gonna get that wood into the sawmills, and it is close to 10 times what the industry is harvesting annually. So we're not going to be able to harvest everything. Because we're at the early stage of summer. It is at the reproduction special moment for the insects that are attacking the wood. So therefore, the insects they don't care about if it's dangerous or not. I mean, they need to reproduce, so they're there and they're going in the fire, and they smell that wood that the bark is burned. So they're going there, digging holes, and then laying their eggs. And then you have a board that sooner or later, and much sooner than later, will be chewed by larvae, and that board is not going to be transformable for softwood lumber. So the challenge that we have is to identify which will be the best patch to harvest and to recuperate, and we need to do so for environmental reason. Because if we're not stocking that carbon that hasn't burned, so it's the branch and the spine that burned, but the tree remains there. So we need to get it cut, get it processed in order to stock the carbon into construction. Otherwise, that carbon will be free to the air and will just exacerbate the situation of the CO2 that is released into the atmosphere. So it's definitely for environmental reason, but at the same time for economic reason, that in order to get some wood into the sawmills and in order to get chips for pulp and paper industry and for panels, and it is really important to do so. But it's such a huge scale that the industry and government need to sit together, make sure that all the gears are aligned, that there's a sufficient amount of oil into the gears, and make sure that everything is fluid, because we're not going to get two shots. We need to do it perfectly the first time.
Yeah. Well, just on that for a moment, is there, for those of us that are not experts in forest management practices, do we know yet, are there already lessons learned in Canada about forest fires? Like, are there things that, because of the historic nature of what just happened in Quebec, you already know today, okay, we're going to do this or that differently? Are we there yet, or are we still kind of in the middle of the battle and it's too early to understand kind of what the lessons learnd are?
Well, there's one thing for sure, is that we're in the boreal forest. And since it's boreal forest, it has been like that for thousands of years, that the nature has a reset button when the trees are getting too old, and nature just restart the cycle by coming with a fire that burns the wood, that brings the insects, that decompose it, and that brings light to soil, and then there are seeds that are released due to the fire, and there's a new forest that just starting. So that's one thing. But the other thing that we've learned from California, and we need to learn from each other on both sides of the border. So we learned from the California fires that and the Oregon's one, that you need to review the way that you're doing forest work on the ground, the way that you manage the forest, in order to remove the dead wood, at least from around the municipalities. Make sure that you protect them as well. So you need to put some money, and especially when you're on crown land, the government owned the land. It was the same thing in California. It was federal forests that were there. Government needs to put money there in order to make sure that it is properly managed and you remove the fuel from the ground. So with the healthcare, with the schools, with different issues, and especially having a 10-year average of 2,000 hectares of forest that has been affected by fire, government is just saying, well, forests don't vote. Forest is not queuing in the hospital. So therefore, when I need to do the budget, well, there will be so much and no more for forest management. But now we see that with the air quality, with the security of people, and we've seen in Fort McMurray last year or two that the entire municipality just burned down. So there's hidden cost of not doing proper forest management. So the government was used to see how much is the real cost, but there's a cost of not doing it. And we kind of forgot what was that cost. And I guess that will be part of the lessons learned in Canada, but I guess in the US as well, that there's a cost of action, but there's also one of not acting on it.
Mr. Samray, we have a kind of a recurring theme on Canusa Street. Really, it's the interaction of the Canadians and Americans. And as your answer sort of highlighted the way that we were learning from California and Quebec was picking up good forest practices, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how connected this industry is in the United States and Canada. I've seen some reports of American firefighters going to help with the wildfires. I know there's a lot of scientific data about forest management that's shared. Can you talk a little bit about maybe dispel the myth that this is a Canadian industry versus an American industry, which is the narrative that comes out of trade, and maybe give us a sense for how the industries talk to each other and how we learn from each other and cooperate in forest management here in North America?
Well, there's certainly a line on a map in between Canada and US, but I think that is the only place that there's one, because really we can see that on the firefighting there's practice, there's a rehearsal, and there's lessons learned on the both sides of the borders. When it gets to sawmill equipments, there's company from Quebec selling to southern states where they want to get to artificial intelligence and so on. And the same thing that there are American companies selling to the US. There's best practice that are learned. There's a training for a forest engineer. We have a North American different association. And so, no, I would say that it's really, when it gets to knowledge, when it gets to best practice, it is a North American industry. It is a North American way of sharing thoughts. When it gets to forest certification, is the same thing. It's mostly done on a continental basis. Of course, there is some regional adaptation. There's some regional reality. Forest in Arizona or New Mexico isn't the one in the Northern Territories. That's for sure. But at the same time, it's not the same forest as in Maine. So, or New Hampshire. So I guess these are some realities. But there's a lot of work that is done together.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's reassuring, because that's what you would expect. To what extent do you think that our governments are having a positive effect in talking about some of these issues? We were talking earlier about sustainability. And yes, forests are a renewable resource, but it does take planning and it does take commitment. Are our governments doing the right things to support the kind of conversations we need to have going forward to keep our forests there for the next generation and the generation after, while we're also producing the kind of wood products that can make homes and so on? Is government here just dealing with disputes, or is there a role for them in thinking about how we sustain this resource we're lucky to have in North America?
Well, there's only one KPI that matters for government. It's being reelected. So therefore, based on that, reality of a governor or a representative of one region and a deputy of another region in Canada is it could be different. There's local issues that are important. But when it gets to what IPCC is kind of saying, that you need to do more forest management, you need to provide more sustainable product out of sustainable forestry managed or forest managed sustainably, in order to reduce GHG materials in construction and in order to replace fossil fuel. So forest is all doing this. And when it gets to the president's office in the U.S., we can see that there's an executive order kind of saying that it was President Biden that sent some troops into Quebec and some firefighters and some equipment to support and to kind of have that same friendship. But you need to realize that smoke is not going to stop at the border. And so are insects, and so are flooding, and so on. So there's a continental base, but at some point later down the road, years come trade, and when there's trade, there's some other disputes, and there's some mechanism on the U.S. that you can get some petition, and then comes commerce, and then so. I guess when it gets on the environmental side, when it gets on education, when it gets into research, it's really, it benefits to everyone. When it gets to the industry, well, it's Joe the plumber's job, and is voting for me, and therefore, so I guess it's both of them.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end here. So I just have one more question, Jean François. This is so interesting to talk to you, and I've learned a lot just in our short time. But if you were in DC just recently, if you had one message that you want every single person in Washington DC in particular to understand about what's going on with your industry, what would that be?
Well, I would say that the forest industry in North America is pretty well integrated, and it should act as one continental industry. So therefore, it benefits to all, and it benefits to voters that are also people that own a house or that want to have one. That taxes aren't good for consumers. So at some point, if we need to go into a more sustainable in a more sustainable world, well, forest products are definitely part of the solution. It's not me, it's not you, it's the IPCC that is saying it. So therefore, we need to look at forests on a continental basis and get rid of these trade disputes.
Get rid of the trade disputes. Okay. Well, I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining us. This is interesting. And again, we've had a lot of conversations on Canusa Street about softwood lumber trade, about the forest industry, but never more poignant than now coming through these forest fires. So thank you for that context as well.
It's my real pleasure, and feel free, just call me, and it will be my pleasure to have a discussion with you again.
You're welcome anytime on Canusa Street.
Chris, it's always interesting on Canusa Street. As I just said, it's more poignant though when in Washington D.C. we were breathing very dangerous air because of forest fires in Quebec. Like, it just happened, and not just in Washington, but in New York and in many places not only in the United States but in Canada. So forest practices, forest fires, all of that, super relevant to us today.
Absolutely. I mean, growing up in Detroit, I remember the acid rain debates because we were sending things across the border that way. And every year we talk about polar vortexes that changed the climate here in the winter and have brought us some really shocking temperatures. No matter how you imagine the border works, the weather ignores it and the wind ignores it. And as a result, we really do have to find a way to cooperate in dealing with the effects of these things. And it's in our interest to do so. But I think so many of us, we don't think about what's going on the other side of the border. It's not in our news until it is. And then it's just great that we have relationships and we have professionals like Jean François Samray who are ready to kind of knit together a cooperative effort and try to manage our forests, in this case, responsibly.
That's exactly right. Well, look, it's always good to talk with you, to build a log cabin with you on Canusa Street, whatever the case may be, Chris. Thanks so much, as always.
Thank you very much. It's nice to have someone who can help us see the forest from the trees.
There we go. All right. See you next time, my friend.
This podcast is brought to you by the Canadian American Business Council and the Wilson Center. If you like this episode, help others find our show and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.